Welcome to Washington Policy on the Go. My name is David Bose. I'm the Communications and Marketing Director for Washington Policy Center. And it's great to have you with us here. We are with you every week for Washington Policy on the Go throughout the legislative session. This is where we talk with our research directors and get the latest on what's happening in their area of expertise. The legislature just started, so much is new. There's a lot moving on, and every researcher their schedule is jam-packed and crammed, filled with legislative hearings and briefings and new proposals and pieces of legislation. Thousands of pieces of legislation will be brought forward, and they're trying to keep track of big chunks of that for you and give you the insight into what the policy proposals would actually do and how they might impact your life and your ability to make a living here in Washington State. So we provide that information to you in a number of ways. One is through this podcast slash vlog, and also on our website, washingtonpolicy.org, where our researchers update the blog on a regular basis. If you don't have time to check that every day, though I recommend that you do, you can subscribe to, and you should subscribe to our newsletter, which is free. It comes out on Fridays, and we provide you a concise list of what information's out there and what you need to know with that newsletter. And you can share that and distribute it among your networks, and we'd encourage you to do that as well, because obviously our research doesn't do that much good if you hold it to yourself. We want as many people to know about it as possible. So that is part of it. Now, today, we're also experimenting with Facebook Live. So we're live today on our social media accounts. We're doing a little bit of an experiment there to see if we can just kind of broaden the scope of what we're trying to do here. Next week, we're doing a separate experiment. This is going to be a live event in the studios here at our Seattle headquarters. So if you'd like to watch a Washington Policy on the Go and ask questions live and be kind of a part of that broadcast, you're welcome to do so. Bring your lunch. We'll provide the coffee and some beverages. You bring your lunch and you can enjoy your lunchtime with us here at our Seattle headquarters at Metro Park West. You can get the details and register at washingtonpolicy.org. Go to the events page there. It's a little section tab at the top, and you'll see it right away. Joining us today first is our Agriculture Research Director, Pam Lewison, who is here with us live from Moses Lake, all the way from Moses Lake. Whenever I meet somebody new to Washington Policy Center and the agriculture comes up, I say, well, our ag researcher actually is a farmer. So not just a policy person, but a practicing farmer as well. So Pam, I know one of the passions you have about bills this year, we talked about it in December, is the tax that Washington institutes, along with Hawaii, but all the rest of the states have gotten over this idea. The tax farm equipment like they do vehicles. And so why don't you update us on what's happening with the idea to repeal that tax in the legislature so far?
So there's at least one bill, and I've written about it, and I'm trying to frantically poke through my notes. 5092 is the bill. It's in the Senate. And what it would do is give farmers a break on sales tax if they buy a piece of equipment that is priced above $10,000. That's not hard to do if you are buying much of anything in ag anymore these days.
I was about to say, anything bigger than a quad is about $10,000 these days.
Pretty
So,
much.
yeah.
So it would cut off the state portion of the sales tax, which is a nice little incentive for farmers to upgrade to a piece of equipment that reduces emissions, perhaps is newer, a little easier on the environment, and puts you in something that is certainly more fuel efficient, potentially has GPS attached to it, which in turn not just makes you more fuel efficient, but a little bit more soil use efficient and so on. And it saves you money, which means you can in turn roll that money savings potentially into something else. So it's a good piece of legislation that Senator Banky has, and it's scheduled for hearing this week. So We're trucking right along through it, and it's an idea that I started floating last summer. So it's really nice to see it come to fruition so quickly.
Well, a couple of things that I want to do here. One is I want to remind people that later on in this broadcast, we'll show you how you can testify remotely. So, if you hear about legislation or there's a piece of legislation that you're tracking and you want to testify before a committee, we're going to show you how a little bit later in this broadcast. We'll do a screen share and walk you through the process. It's really easy. You don't even have to do it live. You can just insert your own comments, as simple as, I like this bill, or I hope this passes. And that's, you don't have to be Shakespeare to provide some commentary on pieces of legislation. So I want to encourage people this legislative session, if you've never testified before a committee, leave some comment, do something live, be more active, and have your voice heard in some small way, and just introduce yourself to the concept, because the more you do that and wake other people up to it, the more you can affect change and be heard. But Pam, I wanted to lay out some groundwork here on why this bill is important. And this is based on some of your work last year, including your Seattle Times op-ed dealing with the disappearance of Washington farms, where we have 2 farms a day disappearing, 14 farms a week. We have more farms disappearing in the last, 3 years than the previous 10, or something close to that. So we have this kind of spiraling increase in farm problems here. And then we have this we have extra burdens being placed on them, and rules being set by people who, let's face it, most people are not farmers. And especially here on the west side, there's a lot of people making legislation on farms that have never actually worked on a farm, and they don't really grasp, there's been some historic exemptions made that have been gotten rid of because people, don't think, don't think in terms of harvests and whatnot. So I just wanted to lay that out there, because you have this increasing number of farms disappearing, and yet people, if you ask them, do you like farmers? Do you support Washington farmers? They'll probably say yes, because there's a lifestyle. People like local foods. They like the fact that the land stays undeveloped and is still accessible to wildlife and birds and all this kind of thing. So, this making sure that Washington farmers can survive is an extra important thing. And I want to point out again, only Hawaii has a sales tax that treats farm equipment like vehicles. The rest of the 48 do not. So just from a competitive standpoint, we're putting Washington farmers at a competitive disadvantage with, farmers in Idaho, Oregon, California, and elsewhere. So,
And I do think that one of the things, not just a competitive disadvantage, but we're not talking about a small expense. I think one of the things that people forget is that farm equipment is not the cost of a car. Um, you know, we talk about cars being expensive. You go to a car dealership and you think, you have to mull it over, right? $50,000 for a car is a lot of money. Um, or 50, 60, $70,000. That's a lot of money. If you are a farmer and you're walking into an equipment dealership and you're contemplating the purchase of a combine and header combination, you're talking about um, a cost that is anywhere in the neighborhood of $500,000 for a used combine, all the way up to 900,000 to $1 million for a new piece of equipment to make you operational, functional. For most people, that is an investment that they cannot fathom. That is for one piece of harvesting equipment. Now, that's not that's not the same as buying a car. That's a lot of money. And so we can't equate those two things, and yet our tax code treats them as being an apples to apples comparison. In fact, yesterday I was at a luncheon talking about this bill, and the joke amongst farmers is farmers are the only people that can tell you the difference between going 5 miles an hour and 5.5 miles an hour, because you're not driving a combine down the road to go to work at your office job. because you aren't. They're not vehicles. They are meant for a very specific operation on a farm, and they need to be treated as such. They are an infrastructure investment in your farm.
Tom, as a question, Pam, what would the annual loss to the budget be? Some combines are 500,000, as you point out, some combines are even more. So do we have an estimate on that?
So we're talking we're talking in the neighborhood of 6.8% interest, or 6.8% in sales tax that's being charged on that. So if you do easy figuring on $100,000, that's $60,000 out the door. I think that's right. So I'm sure someone's going to chime in and tell me that I'm wrong because I don't do math in my head. That's what calculators are for. But 6.8% interest, or excuse me, 6.8% sales tax on that investment is what you're looking at. It's in my paper. Someone will, Donald pulled it up for me. Um,
Yeah, I think he was asking about the state hit, like how much would the state lose?
You know, here's the thing about the hit to the state. No one can tell me the answer because when I have asked the Department of Revenue, how much is this going to cost us if we pull this out? They said, well, we can't really tell you because we track the sales of farm equipment the same as we do cars. So they can't tell me which one is a car and which one is a combine. Um, I would argue it should be fairly easy to sift through that. I don't know how many folks are driving around in Washington State with a $500,000 purchase, but the code is the same, I'm told. So,
And, and when you think about it, if you're losing farms, maybe it's one of those things where if we continue to lose the number of farms, there's going to be less equipment perhaps purchased by the individual farms. So there's a lot of moving parts there, but maybe we'll find out finally because they'll have to put a number on it for the legislation.
yeah,
Stephen, yeah, go ahead. Oh, this is another comment coming in from Stephen. He says, I owned a manufacturing plant in Washington State and capital equipment we could write off the sales tax. I was surprised farmers weren't getting this.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are surprised. I'd like to correct my math. $100,000, you're at $6,800 in sales tax savings. There you go. Because it's going to bother me all day. But I think
I was thinking of the million. To be fair, you brought up a million, so I'm going to just throw your brain a lifeline there and say, I bet you because I know I was thinking of that, but yeah.
So I think I think a lot of people are surprised that this particular little slice of the pie is not exempt already, because it seems like it should be. And when I started looking into other places that are really agriculture heavy, you look at the Midwest in particular, this is an advantage that they're already afforded. So what's interesting about this is it makes it more cost effective for farmers in Washington to look at purchases of farm equipment in the Midwest and in the South, and actually purchasing those pieces of equipment there and having them shipped here on a truck and paying the sales tax is still cheaper than buying them here, which puts not just farmers at a disadvantage, but also our equipment dealers.
So one final question on this particular piece of legislation, and that is there bipartisan agreement on it, or is it kind of lopsided at this point, or is it too early to say? Because obviously, Democrats have the overwhelming majority in both houses, and so I'm just curious, is this the kind of thing that is kind of, gone beyond the usual east side versus west side kind of thing?
I think it's too early to say. I would hope that we can certainly get bipartisan support if it's not already there, because this is something that benefits everyone who participates in that food production space. And ultimately, we all have to eat. And being able to make every person who participates in the production of food more cost effective and more competitive is not a bad thing for anybody.
Yeah, and it's funny. One of the big values, a progressive value on the west side, would be described as, there's a lot of people who place a high value on local production of food and and buying locally and eating locally and other things. And this is one way to do that, is to make sure that your local farms don't disappear on you and make sure that they're not suffering from disadvantages that could be avoided. You mentioned to me that there's another bill that was brought forward by a legislator in the 10th district, I believe, State Senator Mazel. How am I saying his name? I worked with him for a time. Doggone it. Go ahead, Pam. What was it?
It's Ron Mazzal.
Mazzal, that's it. He's from my old neck of the woods, so I should be better at that, but it always throws me off, just the Mazzal. I want to say it the wrong way. Anyway, more power to him. He was in a close election this year, but he pulled through. He's got a new piece of legislation up called the Feast Act. What is that composed of? What's it designed to do?
So the bill number is 5117 for anybody who wants to look it up. And what it does is, I'm going to read the intent section really briefly, because I think really gives a really good brief overview.
There's nothing better than reading. Nothing more compelling on video than reading.
I know. It's brief. Promote a stable food supply by maintaining a healthy agricultural economy in Washington state, and ensure that the regulatory environment does not adversely affect the ability of Washington's farmers to continue to grow and sell their products to feed the citizens of Washington state and the world. So what it really does is give those in Washington state who produce food the opportunity to do so. And it's doing that by requiring bills moving forward to assess how they're going to impact the economic feasibility of farmers in our state. Now, this is in my opinion, this goes directly to a conference that was held this last summer that looked at ag viability in Washington and how to make us, as a state, what was termed during that conference as lean and mean. How do we become the most cost-effective per ton, per acre, per whatever unit of product we produce on our farms? And this speaks directly to that.
Interestingly, how would that manifest itself in terms of policy? What would he be looking for, and what agency would be involved? And any ideas?
So what this is doing is saying, I think a great example that we are seeing play out right now is when you look at things like overtime. How is overtime affecting the ability of our producers to, in turn, continue to conduct business, continue to keep farm workers employed, and continue to be competitive, not just on a state but global scale? Are they able to continue to be competitive, or are they having to close their doors and sell and consolidate and those kinds of things? So what that looks like on a sort of larger structural scale, we don't know yet. And it could be that they may find themselves put in a different kind of environment entirely. We don't know.
Well, I want to remind people, if you feel passionately about either of these issues, we're going to explain how you can directly add commentary to either one of these bills via the remote testimony options. You can do it live through a committee if you sign up, or you can just leave a written comment. It's really easy, and you can make that happen. We had Kevin was watching, and he brought up an interesting exemption. So we have farmers being taxed on their equipment like a vehicle, but if you farm wind, you get a sales tax exemption. I thought that was so you're farming nothing basically. There's just the wind in the air. Then you can get the exemption, but food not yet. So hopefully that will change this year. That'd be great. Pam, I know you have other obligations coming up here in a moment, so I want to let you go and make sure that you're on time for the most important next schedule for you. Thanks so much for joining us on the go, and we'll see you pretty soon.
Well, thanks for having me, Dave. I always enjoy our visits.
Love it, Pam. Thank you.